some opportunities for us to raise awareness together. So Bonnie and I have undertaken a couple of initiatives in that regard previously, and this is culminating in the webinar today. So thank you so much to both of you for being here and for sharing your time and your expertise with us. So without further ado, I think we'll get started. We're going to take a bit of a conversational format today. So we'll have a series of questions, and then time permitting at the end, your questions will have been collected, and we'll have a few minutes for those as well. So just to get started, Julia, as a member of the Executive Committee of the International Society for Nutritional Psychiatry Research, can you describe for us the growing field of nutritional psychology and psychiatry?
There we go. Okay, there we go. Well, first of all, thank you so much for the invitation, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be speaking to a Canadian audience from New Zealand, and hopefully advancing this space within within Canada. So, to answer your question, nutritional psychiatry was coined about 10 years ago by Felice Jacka, who's at the University of Deakin or Deakin University in Melbourne. And the concept is that you're putting together the psychology or psychiatry space, which is about mental health and mental health disorders, and then you're marrying that with nutrition and saying that there's an association between the two, a really important association between the two that we need to really highlight and emphasize. And therefore, the research that's being done in this space is looking at how your food environment is impacting on our mental health, and in turn, though, the great opportunity that we have to manipulate food or change diet or add nutrients in order to improve mental health. So it's been absolutely wonderful that we've had such a huge interest in this space around researchers around the world who are really trying to advance this field so that we can educate the public, which is another mission of the society, is educating the public and other researchers around the world so that people stop ignoring the impact that food has on our mental health, which has pretty much been the case to date.
Thank you. And I think that's such an important relationship to be exploring. And Bonnie, how did you come to work in this field? Just think you need to just unmute Bonnie. Thanks.
I think you're using the mute all button, and I didn't realize that. Sorry, Kathryn. I was just saying, as the older of this pair of speakers today, you won't be surprised probably to learn that my first paper on the role of nutrition in mental development was published in 1972. So I'm thrilled to be here because we've kind of, even Julia's surprised, we've come a long way. It took a long time, but the public is beginning to recognize the importance of what they put in their mouths. And I'll just use one concrete example of why it has, I mean, I have always been interested in the biological basis of behavior. So when I studied psychology, any aspect of it, when I went into postdocing in neurosciences, any aspect of it, I always wanted to know what the nutrients were that were involved. So now we know very recent data from both the US and Canada shows that more than 50% of what our people are putting in their mouths and consuming every day, more than 50% basically has no nutrients. It's ultra processed. I call it ultra processed rubbish. It's stuff, with lots of long chemical names and lots of sugar and not very healthy fats, etc., but none of the vitamins, minerals, and essential fatty acids that our brains need. And I'm afraid we have generations of people who think that's okay, that their brains don't need anything except air, I guess. I don't know, but we'll try to dispel that notion as we go along, won't we, Kathryn?
Yes, absolutely, Bonnie. Thank you. And I do think it's true. I think, even before I came to nutrition, I didn't necessarily give a lot of thought to how what I was eating was impacting the health of my brain. And it was only when I started to make changes that I really noticed a difference. So, Bonnie, perhaps you can give us a brief overview of why micronutrients, vitamins and minerals, essential fatty acids, amino acids, why they're important to the brain.
Sure. Both Julie and I have focused a lot of in our research on minerals and vitamins, which we use the name micronutrients to refer to. I don't think a lot of people would be comfortable referring to omega-3s as a micronutrient. So it's the micronutrients, the amino acids, the essential fatty acids like omega-3s, etc. These are the building blocks of our brain. But I'm going to give you two examples, and we decided that we probably won't show the slides because it would take too long. I think I can put it into words. The first example of what people really have to learn is the word cofactor. And I wish I were in the room with all of you because I'd ask you to raise your hand if you knew what a cofactor was. And it takes too long to do it electronically. At any rate, everybody should know what that is. Minerals and vitamins are the cofactors in every metabolic step that we know of in the human brain or body. What that means is if you want to change a chemical, not you, but if your body needs to change a chemical A to chemical B, we call that metabolism. And it is always an enzymatic step. So an enzyme is making it happen. And you've all heard the word enzyme. But what you probably haven't heard is that enzymes don't work optimally unless they have an abundant supply of the cofactor. And the cofactors all rely on minerals and vitamins. So you have to have minerals and vitamins coursing through your bloodstream and through the blood in your brain 24/7 for the entire time that you're living. And your brain is the greediest organ. So that's one thing. I mean, we also need it for our bones and our muscles and all that, but mostly for our brain. And the second example, very briefly, some of you will remember you learned about ATP, the energy molecule. All of our cells, almost all of our cells, not all of them, but almost all of our cells have lots and lots of mitochondria in them. And these are the little energy factories, and they all rely on what? Nutrient input. And when they have adequate nutrient input, they produce enough ATP, and that ATP does 1.5 million things throughout your brain and body. So we constantly need to have these minerals and vitamins. We need especially the essential fatty acids for building our brain cells. We need nutrients. We're dependent on them. And we have all these people who said basically, oh, I'm going to cut what I get in half. I'm not going to have any problem with that, am I? Well, now we're finding out that we do.
Thank you, Bonnie. And it's true, the brain is so reliant on micronutrients, and your description of cofactors is really important because when you map it out, it's astonishing, even to get from, say, tryptophan to serotonin, all of the cofactors that are required in that process. So, Julia, as someone who has published on micronutrients in pregnancy, why is this research and this information especially important to children and expecting new mothers?
Sure. I mean, I think where we need to start is to first highlight some of the recent observational studies that have been done in pregnancy, associating what the mother is eating during pregnancy and the offspring, as well as her own mental health. And it is not a good picture. It should be alarming. Anyone in government should be saying we need to do something about this, because they're not meeting even the basic dietary guidelines, which I think there are a lot of problems with some of the dietary guidelines, but even that in New Zealand, only 3% of mothers meet those guidelines. So at the moment, we have this really alarming picture of ultra processed foods being consumed during pregnancy. I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I think there is food insecurity. I think there's the cost of living crisis that is contributing to that, but also that for such a long time, over the last, at least as long as I've been on this planet, which is pretty much as long as since Bonnie's first publication, is that we have been so taught about calories, and when I was growing up it was all about calories and counting calories, and so it meant that people thought that a calorie didn't matter where you got it from, and so it was okay to get it from a Twinkie if it was a calorie versus getting it from a banana. So we've grown up with generation that just don't understand that there's actually differences between those two. So you might have the same macronutrient composition, like your fats and your proteins and your carbs, but the micronutrient content is so depleted in those ultra processed foods. And that's something that we really have to educate. And that's why we're having these kinds of seminars and why we talk so much to the public about this, because that's something that I don't think a lot of people understand, is that those foods are really depleted in nutrients. So, in pregnancy, the studies are showing that if mom is eating ultra processed food during pregnancy, that increases the risk of her child having developmental disorders, ADHD, autism, internalizing disorders. But the good news is that the more the mom is eating real whole foods during pregnancy, that reduces the risk. Now, I'm not saying that it's the only risk factor. Of course, it isn't. There are other things going on, and it doesn't mean that if there, you should feel guilty if during your pregnancy you ate you know, a donut, and that doesn't mean that your child is going to have a developmental disorder. It's the accumulation effect. And so it's that dose response. So, for example, there was a study that followed about 1,000 mothers and their infants, an offspring, and showed that the for the if mom was having a one daily sugar sweetened beverage during the pregnancy, so on average at least one, the accumulative effect on the IQ of the offspring was 1.2 IQ points on average was decreased. So that might be seen as a small effect potentially, but if the more she drinks, the more that impact could happen. But that's not out of line of what happened with alcohol. And I remember seeing those studies when I was a graduate student in the 1990s about the effects of alcohol on IQ, and it's around that same mark as in terms of impact and that dose response. So we really do need to be paying attention to this, because it has influenced the recommendations that we're making to women during pregnancy in terms of alcohol. Well, how about we start talking about ultra processed foods in that same category? That might seem a bit extreme, but the research are solid enough in those observational studies that we should pay attention. No one ever did a randomized controlled trial of alcohol use during pregnancy and the impact it had on its offspring. We really don't need to do that with ultra processed foods as well. So, in our research, what we've been doing is that we've been looking at supplementation in pregnancy. And so, we did a big study that we called NutriMum, and I'm really excited about it because it has huge implications around the treatment of antenatal depression or prenatal depression during pregnancy. And so, we gave a broad spectrum of micronutrients. No one nutrient is special. Going back to the cofactors that Bonnie was just explaining, there's multiple cofactors that are required in all of those enzymatic reactions. So broad spectrum, about the 30 essential micronutrients, vitamins, and minerals that we need in doses that are above recommended dietary allowances. And just to sort of touch on that really briefly, those are really it's the RDA is a really outdated concept. They really haven't been updated to take the brain into consideration. They were developed to make sure that we could, the armed forces could fight post World War II, or that they have sufficient rations. But it's not about what the brain needs. And so and I don't know why there hasn't been a greater effort to resolve that. But that's how it is. And unfortunately, it means that, again, the public think that that's adequate if you get RDA, but it's really a minimum amount, and it's for it's an amount that is good for a healthy individual. But we're not dealing with people who are healthy. These are people who are struggling and are really vulnerable. So their needs, their nutritional needs are higher. So when we did that, we found some amazing results. One of them was that the mothers who were randomized to the micronutrients overall globally did better than the placebo group, although both groups showed great improvement, which was wonderful to see. And it just reminds us that just that light touch therapy, looking after people, being interested, caring for them, monitoring them during their pregnancy, can really be influential in terms of their mental health status. But what was really exciting was the outcome on birth. And in terms of the birth outcomes, those babies that were exposed to the micronutrients during pregnancy, we were came out with a lower preterm birth percentage. We had 5.5% were preterm birth in our micronutrient exposed infants. And if you compare that to the national average is around 8 to 9%. But if you are depressed, then the likelihood of you having a preterm birth is 15%. We had a comparison group, and we had particularly a comparison group of moms who were taking antidepressants, and that rate was 20%, which is around what is being observed in the literature. So that was a really good news story. There were other amazing changes that benefits from taking the micronutrients during pregnancy. There was less likely of postpartum hemorrhaging. The infant was less likely to be resuscitated. And then the infants, when they were born, we looked at really early capacity and capabilities, things like motor control, orientation, regulation of state, reflexes. And in every single thing that we looked at, those micronutrient exposed babies were coming out ahead, and even ahead of just sort of typical standard pregnancies where mom hadn't been depressed during pregnancy. So it was just a really wonderful story that should be particularly of interest to people who treat these moms because again, if we step back and we look at what we're currently doing, we're currently often moms are offered antidepressants, and what's told to them is that the benefits outweigh the risks. That it's important that she take them to monitor to make sure that her mood is good, because that can have impacts on the offspring and her ability to have a good relationship and attachment with her infant. All of those things, and those are true potentially, although they haven't been very well studied. There haven't been any randomized controlled trials that show that antidepressants are helpful during pregnancy. I'm sure they are in many cases, but it is something that is remarkably neglected in the literature. And it doesn't seem to take away the risks associated with depression, whereas the micronutrient intervention did. So it's a really positive story. So I kind of a long-winded answer for you, Kathryn, but I really wanted to highlight how we really need to be paying attention here. And just as a final note, we often think about single nutrients in terms of supplementation during pregnancy, like folic acid or iodine or vitamin D. I think this research is saying because probably partially because of this rapid change in the food environment, what we used to just think was relevant to third world countries where they need a broad spectrum of micronutrients to support the pregnancy. I think we're at that point where that really needs to be happening here as well, unless we really do something drastic and dramatic with our food environment and, really help women massively reduce their consumption of ultra processed foods and support them to eat more healthy, nutrient dense foods.
Thank you, Julia. And two things that you mentioned in particular also really stuck out to me. The one is that there isn't an assignment of blame, that we recognize that there are broader policy and societal forces at play that are resulting in the way in which people are eating, including growing rates of food insecurity here in Canada. And the other piece that you just touched on towards the end again was that synergy between nutrients. And that quite a bit of what we've looked at up to this point has often been like a single nutrient approach to a study, and that can ignore or negate the synergistic activity between nutrients. So, and you've touched on this a little bit already, but why is it that some people seem to require a higher amount of micronutrients to achieve optimal brain health?
Yeah. Well, I think you've just touched on some of them, and they are like the wider community, is that we are flooded with ultra processed foods, and so those are often the easy decisions, and also they are cheaper at the supermarket. I think they're way more expensive to our health long term, but when it comes to thinking about well, how much money do I have right now to for the grocery store purchases, then oftentimes those decisions are going to be made at that level. I think, as going to the blame, the individual blame, I absolutely agree with you that this is not about individual blame at all. This is about the food industry taking responsibility, the government influencing the regulations around the food industry. It's about those fiscal levers that are used to influence what people buy. That can be through taxes on sugar. All of those things can influence the choices that people make. The packaging. I mean, at the moment, ultra processed food packaging suggests that these are really healthy. In my country, they get these star rating systems, and you can have something that is absolutely 100% ultra processed food and get a 5 out of 5 star rating because it's low in fat, low in sugar, low in salt, low in calories. but it's not anything about the nutrient value of that food and the micronutrients that go into it really doesn't come into those rating systems. So we have a really broken rating system to guide the public. So those types of things need to really be addressed as well. And yes, so those are things that can contribute to whether or not somebody needs more nutrients out of a pill, for example, because of the food environment. We're also, I mean, Bonnie could talk about this forever, I know, which is around the quality of our soil and the microbiome of the soil and the nutrient depletion that's happening in the soil, and that then influences the fruits and vegetables that we eat, because if you don't have the minerals in the soil, then you're not going to consume them. So we need to address the quality of the soil and really support farmers to be good stewards of the soil. And some other things would be in those the enzymatic reactions that Bonnie talked about, those enzymes that are required to convert A to B. You can end up with slight differences in your genetics that mean that enzyme doesn't work quite right. And so we call those inborn errors of metabolism, but you can correct that with more nutrients, so with more vitamin and mineral cofactors. Other environmental things that are happening, there's so many pollutants in the air, or not in the air, in our food as well, the plastics, et cetera, that we're consuming are one of the other pathways that are also dependent on vitamins and mineral availability are the detoxification pathways. So that can overload your system because they're required for that. If you're really stressed, like individual factors like being stressed, being pregnant, going through a growth spurt, older age means that you probably need more nutrients because we are not as good at getting the nutrients out of our food as we age. So there's a lot of other factors that can influence it that may mean that an individual needs more than just a really good diet.
Thank you. That's a wonderful answer. And certainly in the Better Brain, you and Bonnie do a really good job of presenting this information. And also in the edX course on nutrition and mental health, which can be offered, I believe, as a free course. So
Yeah, it
I
is.
would encourage
Still
anyone who's
there.
interested to take a look on edX for the nutrition and mental health course. It really digs into a lot of what we're discussing here today in a lot greater detail, and you can work through it on your own time. But Bonnie, what inspired you to write the Better Brain?
I get asked this a lot. I was the instigator, but I was delighted that Julia agreed to work with me. Basically frustration, because I had been watching the years tick by and the evidence accumulate, and seeing no mass media coverage of any of the results. I mean, it would not be hard for Julia and me to put together a list of 100 studies, worldwide studies, showing, proving the link between nutrient intake and mental health. And I have only ever seen one study covered in the mass international media. I've never asked you, Julia, you know which one I'm referring to, Felice Jacka's SMILES trial.
Oh, SMILES trial. Yeah.
It kind of caught the interest of a lot of journalists. Have you ever seen another one covered internationally? No.
No,
One out of 100. Go ahead.
yeah,
What?
I know, and I've been really disappointed with the lack of interest in the Nutrimum study, and that was not for lack of effort from my part to try to communicate those results. Did a conversation piece, did so much reaching out to try to get some attention to that, and there was just no interest. You're like, why is there no interest? This
I know,
affects the
it's our
next generation.
population. Yeah. And your university put out a
Yeah.
press
Oh,
release
yeah.
about it
We
too.
did.
No.
We got into the local
Yeah.
newspaper.
Yes. That's certainly what I had seen too. So frustration was really big. Now, related to that frustration was while I was watching all this nutritional research being basically ignored by the public, I was seeing exaggerated interest in some of the other factors, which I totally respect, which are very important for mental health. And some of you who are working in the field know what I'm talking about. Exercise, meditation, breathing, you name it. These are all, they help people. I have complete respect for that. But why, until very recently, was it not seen that most of those did not have anywhere near the evidence base of that nutrition had? And yet even the people working in those fields would not really often refer to the evidence base on nutrition. There's something about nutrition, and we could talk about it, but probably don't have time here, that somehow gets put aside as a separate category, and it's part of healthy living. Now, I'm seeing really a lot of changes in the last 3-4 years, so I'm feeling more optimistic. But when we were writing The Better Brain, I was frustrated and mad. And I also recognized that because nobody in power was talking about anything, I mean, they would shift the conversation to exercise, which again, I respect, but they were not showing any interest in implementing any of the research that had been done. It just, it just got so that we felt that we had to go to the general public. So The Better Brain is not written at a highly technical level. It's written for the general public. And we've had lots of feedback about that because we tell a lot of stories and true stories with changing names, anecdotes and illustrations, etc., so that people can grasp the information that we're putting forward. And I think that that's been really gratifying to see how that's accepted.
Thank you, Bonnie. And certainly it's a wonderful read. I would highly recommend it. For those of you in the Peterborough area, Take Cover Books did very kindly order in some copies. So if you're in and around Hunter Street in Peterborough, you can pick one up there, or it's available online. But it again is a wonderful way to into this information with good illustrative stories and pieces like that as well. So Bonnie, maybe you could just touch a little bit more on what it is about the properties of whole food that make it ideal for supporting brain health.
Okay, well, I'd like to mention two things. I think anybody who's been listening to the first half hour here recognizes that we are food first people, Julie and I. Anybody studying nutrients, even in pill form, we're food first people. We want to support the regenerative agriculture movement, remineralization of the soil, healthier crops, fewer toxins, and educating people to select from the produce department, which should have big signs saying, get your prebiotics here, because your gut microbiome will be much healthier and happier if you do that. But there are other things I could talk about too. It's not just because you get more of the nutrients we've been talking about, vitamins and minerals, etc. There's this other thing called a phytonutrient, okay, which just means plant nutrient. It's a real general category. And if you just Googled it, you would find that some people think there are about 1,000 of them. Others people think there are 20,000. Very few of them have been studied. Very few of them have names. I can mention lycopene or resveratrol. Those are phytonutrients. They don't fit into the micronutrient area or the essential fatty acids or amino acids, but they are plant nutrients. And guess what? They are packaged in nature with the other nutrients that we're talking about here. So they must be really important for our brains and our bodies. We just don't know what yet. And there are so many thousands of them. It's not going to happen in our lifetime that we're going to have a thorough knowledge of them. But if you're eating healthy or the produce of healthy plants, then you're going to be getting a spectrum of phytonutrients that Mother Nature thought that we needed. Or I could flip it around and say that we have evolved to need because they come with the other nutrients that we need. So there's this mysterious area out there that you'll be grabbing also if you're eating from whole, healthy foods.
Thanks, Bonnie. And that's a really good point about phytonutrients. And there's quite a lot of research going on about different phytonutrients as well. So it's an important piece of the whole food component in our discussion today. Julia, is there anything that you would like to add about your most recent research? And perhaps also in talking about the multitude of studies available, why it's important that you are seeing other researchers replicating your findings as well?
Sure. So I started my first randomized control trial was with adults with ADHD. There was a reason why we went with adults. We were hoping to work with children, but they said until you do a study with adults, we're not going to let you work with kids. So that's why we did that. But
They meaning the ethics committee.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah,
They
that,
were
sorry,
afraid
yes.
of those scary vitamins and minerals.
That
Right.
that is right. I mean, in fact, the very, very first study that I that never got we never managed to do it was a study, case studies or case series with teenagers with bipolar disorder. We never were managed to be able to recruit. There was so much opposition to the concept of giving nutrients to treat a serious mental health disorder that we just couldn't move forward. And I know Bonnie has stories about that too. Did you want to mention that?
No, no, no. You go ahead.
Okay,
You're too
so
negative.
yeah, it is very, it was a very,
Very bad
it was,
time.
I can remember just those early days of very long phone, of distressing phone calls with Bonnie, just going, I don't understand. I'm just trying to study this. And why can't we even get it off the ground? And why are ethics committees being so difficult? So we've had a lot of opposition from the very beginning. And Bonnie has certainly had more than I have from Health Canada. It spans longer. I'm getting there. I think I'm probably catching up to Bonnie in terms of the amount of frustration and just ridiculous craziness from every corner, every place that you can imagine. From, just for the audience to understand, it's from the ethics committees, the funding, not getting funding, the trying to publish it, not being able to get through the gatekeepers, they're not interested, the reviewers, not understanding the concept of giving broad spectrum nutrients. Why don't you just do a single nutrient? The journals rejecting so much of this work. And then as we've told you that even when it gets published, that the media don't pick it up and the governments don't pick it up. So there's a lot of challenges in this space. So, but to highlight the positive research, because individuals can find all of this research. A lot of it is open access. That's a really important commitment that I've made, is to pay the extra money to make them open access, particularly in the last few years. So we've done studies on ADHD, and that was adults with ADHD showing positive benefit, greater response rates in the micronutrient group compared to placebo. We then replicated that with kids, and then you asked me about international replication. That was replicated by a 3-site study in the U.S. and Canada. It was Oregon Health Sciences University, Lethbridge, and Ohio State University. And they showed even more strong effects on those kids with ADHD. They recruited a group with emotional dysregulation and ADHD, so those kind of really irritable ADHD types kids. That was based on our research finding that we were noticing the benefit for ADHD kids was not really in the reduction in attention, hyperactivity, impulsivity, although that did improve. The greater impact was that these kids were calmer, they weren't irritable, they weren't having temper tantrums. And that when you're parenting a kid, a child with those additional challenges, having those just calm right down does actually just have a positive impact in itself on ADHD symptoms and makes it just easier to parent and for that child to function in a school environment. So and then so they replicated it, and it is so important. I was more excited when that study came out, called the Maddie trial, than any of my own, because I sometimes you're just in this I live very far away from a lot of people in this small island in the South Pacific. And you do start to wonder, is it just us that we can see the benefits of micronutrients? And so when we saw that, that was really fantastic. And we're all kind of observing the same thing, which is this, there's something about the micronutrients given in the pill form where the benefit really does seem to be sort of what we call transdiagnostic. The emotional regulation calms, gets better. They're less anxious. They're more resilient. I mean, I think that's something that's really important. When bad things happen, they just seem to be able to handle it better and not have a meltdown. So those things that aren't specific to any disorder, you'll see it in your mood disorders. You'll see it in the neurodevelopmental disorders. You'll see that in your people who have personality challenges. You'll see it in all kinds of different spaces. And in all of those areas, you see those benefits. A lot of times people will go, there's no way you can help so many disorders. That's only if you think that disorders are single entities, kind of like, I don't know, like a bacterial infection or, just specific things like from a medical perspective. It's not how the brain is operating. So we need to break down some of those barriers and that understanding of how mental disorders are classified. But that's, again, another story, a very long story.
Thank you. That was a fabulous answer. And I think it's really exciting I can imagine how energizing it would be to see your research replicated in that way, and to have this growing field and growing number of colleagues who are working within it. And for you as well,
Yes.
Bonnie.
Y- And
Um,
just to add, if there are any researchers here in Ontario, I do go to Ontario from time to time, and I would certainly love to see replication. It needs to happen. Bonnie and I have talked to so many people over the years of, that just sort of interested, but I don't know why they just don't do that extra step of doing a research study. It's so important. And in all fairness, this idea, this concept of vitamins, broad spectrum micronutrient intervention in a pill form is a Canadian idea. So embrace it. Embrace that and see if, we can get more research done in Canada.
Great point. Thank you, Julia. Bonnie, we've touched on this a little bit already, but I know sometimes people say, oh, well, if you're just studying broad spectrum micronutrient formulas, isn't that kind of just a shotgun approach? Just shoot this at the wall and see what sticks. But wouldn't it be better to study just a couple of nutrients? And indeed, we see that with something like vitamin D or magnesium or B12. But is there anything you'd like to add in that respect about the importance of studying these broad spectrum micronutrients?
People who are looking for a single magic ingredient or two, or I call them the favorite few, just don't know how the brain works. They don't know what the cofactors are. They don't understand that you need roughly 30 micronutrients every minute of every day in your brain and your body. And that's all 30 that are usually identified as the minerals and vitamins. You also need omega-3 fatty acids, especially during key periods of life when you're building brain cells, etc. So no, the idea that, yeah, it's a shotgun, but that's a dismissive term. And I don't use it dismissively. You need the whole spectrum. Everybody does.
Thank you. It's a very good point. And
Yeah.
in my own personal experience, making changes for my nutrition largely in support of addressing chronic migraines, what I noticed is how much my mental health improved and how there were behaviors that had accompanied me for a good part of my adult life that suddenly seemed to just fall away. And I realized, oh, I'm not doing that anymore, or I feel so much better in this respect. And that's part of what drove my initial passion to look more into the role of nutrition in mental health specifically. But you had mentioned that the book, of course, has a number of stories like that. But do you both have a story that really sticks out to you as one that's very memorable?
Hmm. I can tell the story of Liam, which is in the book and which is, I think, extremely important. That's not his real name. Think about who you'd like to talk about, Julia. But I found out that an acquaintance of mine was watching his family dissolve because he and his wife were, after several years of parenting courses and various kinds of training and education, could not manage their son, who at that time was 6 years old and had meltdown after meltdown. And what was really interesting is that this boy would go to school and be a sweet little boy, and he'd come home, and just like a child who suppresses their tics very often in a social environment, they come home and tick, 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 in case you're not familiar with that. He would come home and explode, explode, explode. But the parents thought, well, we must not be doing a very good job of parenting. And so they were really down on themselves, and it was hurting the marriage, et cetera, et cetera. And so the father is a data analyst kind of person. And when I talked to him about my research and said, why don't we just try him? He wasn't in a study. There was no ethics approval. There was no consent form. But if you want, I'll tell you what to try out. And what happened was because he was a data-oriented person, he set up an Excel spreadsheet so that he would count the number of meltdowns. And the next day, there was nothing to count. Now, the boy was still, this is not unusual. Micronutrients are very rapidly absorbed and have function right away. This is not something that you have to wait weeks to see. It was an optimal response, was not optimal response. But what was interesting is they could see that he was able to, he'd start working his way up. And if you've ever been around a child who explodes, you know what that looks like. And then he would bring himself down. He was able to self-regulate. And so he had no data, which was fine because we weren't going to publish it anyway. But it's been very interesting. This child's never had a bad spell again because they keep him on micronutrients. So who are you thinking of, Julia?
I'm really struggling because I mean, the ones that do really pop up that I think you remember are those kinds of kids that we've had so many of those kids come through our studies, and they are
Yes.
rageful and they are out of control and they are being expelled from school, and the parents are getting phone calls every day. So when people think, oftentimes people say these nutrients can't possibly treat serious problems. I would say that's exactly the kind of kids we see benefit. The mild ones, you won't, of course, notice it that much because they're not struggling as much. It's those really difficult kids that we have seen absolute transformation of those kids. And for us as researchers, we've been had the fortune, and I know Bonnie's also seen people over like a decade. So this is not something that, it works for a little bit and then the effect goes away. Sometimes the symptoms do return, but for usually we can find the reason. In kids, what we see is that when they go through a growth spurt, that tends to mean that the nutrients are getting diverted to the growth part. And so there's less available for regulation of emotions, is how I think about the nutrients as a finite resource. So that'll happen. And then we just say, well, I just say increase the dose for a little bit. And then, or if somebody gets sick, we've
Mhm.
heard that as well. So there are good reasons for it. But just on that note, as an aside, the Maddie study that I referred to earlier, the
That's the,
kids,
you didn't give the
the
name. Yeah.
the U.S. study, the
The US
ADHD,
Canadian one. Yeah.
and yeah, the U.S. sorry, U.S. and Canadian one was they monitored the height of those kids over an 8-week
Oh,
period,
yeah.
and the
Yeah.
kids on the micronutrients grew 6 millimeters more than the kids on placebo. And
In 12
we also
weeks, I
in
think.
8 weeks.
8 weeks.
I think it was eight
Yeah.
weeks. Yeah. And then our study, which was 10 weeks, we saw not quite as strong an effect. But we had also seen that the kids were growing more on the micronutrients. So it just highlights that the side effects are really positive, and that you don't see the side effects that can be associated with our current standard care. I mean, to highlight a current study that is not published, but that we did with teens. We monitored really carefully because we had partially because we had a data monitoring committee. I think we overdid it, was monitoring suicidal ideation in these teens. It went down for actually both groups. We didn't see uh, um, an increase in suicidal ideation, which is something that has been noted in antidepressants. And so when we publish this, I really hope it gets splashed around the world, but probably not. Probably will get ignored. But there are these warnings of taking antidepressants during teenage years. And it will be, it's at least nice that people will have a choice if they can find it, if they can find that information, and be made aware of it from their clinicians. But I think we're still a long way away from that being mainstream. So I didn't give you a specific story, but that was partially because it was those kind of like what Bonnie's kind of kids. I guess what I could say was after the earthquake that happened in 2011, we had so many stories based on our studies on using additional nutrients as a way to help reduce stress and PTSD symptoms associated with that incredible event. And we just had so many stories of people feeling calmer, more resilient, better able to deal with the ongoing aftershocks that we experienced for over a year. So there was just a really positive impact that the nutrients had during that really stressful time.
Thank you.
Kathryn,
Yes,
Kathryn,
Bonnie.
I took a quick peek at the questions, and understandably, people are asking us, what are the formulas that we studied? And I think, Kathryn, you know that we try so hard not to talk about any of the companies because even though we say it again and again and again, people don't believe us. We are not financially affiliated with any company. We never have been, we never will be. They don't fund our research, they don't fund us, etc. But given this audience, I assume there are a lot of clinicians online. Could I put in the chat maybe the two websites they should look at or something like that?
I think that would be suitable, and it connects to kind of my final question before we move to maybe some of the questions from people here with us today. But how do you see the challenge that I see arising out of all of this is that the research is quite robust, but how do we now begin to see it translated into clinical practice guidelines? And certainly as a nutritionist, there's a certain amount that I can do with whole food and with basic supplementation, but I cannot be working with clients around who are taking medication who need to titrate back and be working in the micronutrients. That's far out of my scope of practice. So we need to see this moving into clinical practice guidelines, and I just wonder what your thoughts are on that.
From my perspective, what I've been trying to do is advocate for the clinical practice guidelines to be changed here in New Zealand. And so so for example, I've written a letter, an opinion letter for the New Zealand Medical Journal so that the Royal Australia New Zealand guidelines for obstetricians and gynecologists include nutrition because it's not in there right now. And in the guidelines for psychiatrists that they incorporate nutrition during pregnancy. So given how robust even it's only one study, it's more than what is available for standard care. It seemed appropriate to be asking for that kind of change. And so there are some people in that space that are starting to wake up and realize, gosh, do they kind of maybe they intuitively, some of them acknowledge that maybe there's some harm. And this might be a little bit less, a more positive option during pregnancy. It's not to say that the antidepressants don't have a role in pregnancy. In some cases, of course, they do.
Yeah.
But here's another option and part of informed choice.
Bonnie, did you have anything that you'd like to add in that respect? Or?
No, I guess I would just mention that the two companies that developed this formula that we have both studied a lot for mental health try to educate clinicians, and that would include you, Kathryn. I don't know if you've talked to either one of them.
I have, yes.
And then you are able to actually purchase it at a discount. I don't know what it is because I'm not a clinician, but anyway, and pass that savings on to your clients. So they have the more experience with the interactions with medications than anybody else. There are a couple of psychiatrists in the States who now have a lot of experience and are writing and publishing about it. Dr. Amelia Villagomez in Texas and Dr. Nosheen Ranjbar in Arizona. And there are all kinds of resources you can find. I hope you're going to put our websites on. We didn't talk about that. But why don't we say them quickly, Julia? Mine is just my name.com, but you have to know my middle initial or you'll never find me because Kaplan is a common name. So bonniejkaplan.com. You'll find some resources there. And Julia, yours is?
I don't know. But if you, it's through the University of Canterbury, but if you Google Julia Rucklidge, you find everything about me. I'm fortunately, I have a unique name. So you'll find more than enough. I see that there's a question around the unpublished studies that I talk about with teens. Unfortunately, you're gonna have to wait. And that can take a long time depending on how enthusiastic journals are to want to publish the research. But publishing these days is getting, sadly, getting slower and slower. Bonnie, you're very lucky to get out because it's a terrible environment at the moment. It's really hard. And AI isn't necessarily helping all of that. And then there was a question around taking the micronutrients alongside ADHD medications. And I mean, you can use, just in terms of practicalities moving forward, we'd always say food first. Bonnie said that. Then try the nutrients if you have somebody who is struggling, like with ADHD. Sometimes, yes, a little bit of medication, probably not in the same dose that would normally be prescribed, could be helpful with those core ADHD symptoms alongside the nutrients. It's easier to do it by adding the medication in after the nutrients than it is the other way
Mhm.
around. So, because then you're dealing with cross tapering and having to reduce that dose of the ADHD, likely to do reduce the dose of the ADHD medication. So that is the preferred way, and that doesn't often happen that way, but that is the preferred way.
Thank you. So we have just a very few minutes left. The final question I'd like to ask you both is, are you hopeful? And if so, what gives you hope?
I'm going to jump in, Julia. The fact that the Canadian Mental Health Association, one regional chapter, has shown this interest gives me hope, because it hasn't happened before anywhere in our country that I know of. Okay,
Thank
Julia?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, I suppose um, I can see hope from the fact that I get invited far more than I can accept to
Mhm.
speak. And now it seems to be going broader. Like I've been recently invited to speak in London at the end of the year in October. Um, I've been invited to speak next year in Banff. So
Oh,
that's,
right. Yeah.
you know that one, Bonnie. So
Right. I'm
thank you very
speaking
much
there
for that.
this year. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So the fact that I'm being invited to go overseas, I've been invited within New Zealand or sometimes into Australia, but not often that way. So that means it's getting it's reaching out to a lot of people, this concept, and that people want to hear more about it. And these are our professional associations, so it'll be about educating different, psychiatrists, obstetricians, gynecologists. I was invited just at the end of last year to speak to obstetricians and gynecologists. So that was really an exciting invitation. So that's happening more and more, that the professions are wanting to know more about it. So that is hopeful, because then hopefully they can make the difference. But there are a lot of barriers, and we have, regulations on dietary supplements that make it really difficult for the companies particularly to talk about the therapeutic benefit. Bonnie and I can talk about that because we're not selling it, but there are very strict rules, at least in New Zealand and in Canada,
Mhm.
around the selling of dietary supplements as having any therapeutic benefit. It's bizarre because water is therapeutic if you're dehydrated. So but unfortunately, a lot of regulations in so many countries ring fence the therapeutic purpose to just medicines, pharmaceutical medicines. So that's kind of the hard road, is that I spent a lot of time trying to talk to government officials who can change these things, these regulations. And that kind of thing needs to probably happen in Canada as well, because the nutrients can't be sold in Canada. That You have to import them into Canada, which is crazy given they were originally, and
Isabella.
concept is from Canadians. So
Mhm.
I mean, shouldn't everyone be really upset and sad about that, that this was an idea that started in Canada, and yet it's not easy to access? You have to import it. Is that right, Bonnie?
Well, yes, and it's getting worse, Julia. You might not know. And I know we're running out of time, so I'll just give you guys one more website if you want to learn about the people who are trying to protect our access to natural health products like vitamins and minerals. Then there's a group called the Natural Health Product Protection Association, but you just need the initials, NHPPA.org. And whoops, here I can type it in, NHPPA.org. So
I
take a look at what they're trying to do. Yeah.
I mean, just to I know, Kathryn, you asked about hope. Um, I hope that every time I speak, that people who heard it want to take action, because I am often told what I have to do, and sometimes I get like I am overwhelmed by how many people tell me what to do, and um, and Bonnie and I cannot do this alone. And there are, of course, other researchers, but there aren't a lot of us. We cannot do this alone. And that is why it's so exciting to be invited to do this, and that the chapter of the Canadian Mental Health Association wants to take this on board. Then what's going to happen from this seminar? How can your association take this forward? How can the people who listened here spread the word, and support this movement, to really acknowledge that the nutritional environment is so essential for a healthy mind and healthy body.
Yeah. Yeah. And thank you. I think that's a wonderful note to end on, is the importance of public education. And I think this has been a great opportunity to share information and to help people understand. I mean, we're saturated with information on the landscape these days, and a lot of it isn't necessarily grounded in this kind of research, which I think then sometimes makes it easier to dismiss the information that is. And so it's really wonderful that you could both join us today and share information about your research and your experiences. And as you've said, Julia, that hopefully inspires some action on the part of others. That's certainly what my studies and then my further reading and research has done for me as well, is to really try to get out there and encourage people to learn more and to take some action to share that information with others. So thank you so much to you both for your time today. It's meant a great deal to me and to the CMHA, and I hope to all of you who have joined us today. And thank you to Jack and to the CMHA, Halliburton, Kawartha, Pine Ridge, for hosting us, and to all of you for joining us. I hope this has been a good learning experience for you. And do keep in touch if you have questions, and the recording will be available as well. So wishing you all the best going forward.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.